Good morning, guys. How are you all doing? Welcome back to my channel. It is actually a Sunday. Normally, I'm pretty organised and I film and edit this video at least 5 days before it goes out. Not today. It's meant to be posted this afternoon. Who knows if I'll actually manage to achieve it or not, maybe a few days late. Anyway, it is a gorgeous Sunday. It's blue skies, sunshine, a little bit chilly, but perfect spring day. Today, I'm talking about blacksmiths and farriers and their role over the centuries. Now, it's going to be quite broad. I mean, you could go into real depth on this subject, but we're kind of going to bounce through the centuries quite quickly. And it's a topic I've been really interested to research because someone who has owned ponies and then horses for a fair proportion of my life, I obviously see the farrier quite regularly to do my horse's feet. So I was quite interested to see had their job role changed much over the years and their kind of importance, especially earlier on, to that community where they were based. So let's get into it. So first up, what is the difference between a farrier and a blacksmith? So a farrier is someone who maintains horses' feet through trimming and understanding the balance of the horse's foot. It's also someone who can make shoes and fit horseshoes. And now the farrier probably uses mainly the same tools as a blacksmith, and the job does cross over a fair bit. And a blacksmith, this is somebody who works with metal, so a metalsmith, who will work with steel and iron, making and mending items through heating the metal, hammering, bending and cutting to create an item. So as I say, the two roles cross over. And if we go back a few hundred years, I'd say the roles were very much entwined. So and most of the time you'd hear people being called a blacksmith. They would make tools, but they would also shoe horses. Blacksmiths have thought to have been around since before the Roman invasion in Britain. Many, many years ago, there was the custom of burying a horse with its master. And this is kind of how we've worked out how early horseshoes were being used and put onto horses, because when these burial sites have been found, the horses in these graves with their master had shoes on, and that's how we've managed to date it. And these ancient grave sites have shown that it was probably the Celts that were the first to shoe their horses or put some sort of shoe on their horses' feet. And in past centuries, blacksmiths and farriers have been real central figures in a community. Most villages and towns would have a blacksmith, and they were a real jack of all trades. They were also a great place for gossip, and I still think that happens to this day. Honestly, there's not much the farrier doesn't know, especially when it comes to kind of like a question things, so like who's selling what horse, who's working now for who, and they know a lot. As I said, farriers, blacksmiths, they were a real jack of all trades. So not only were they shoeing horses and mending things and creating new items, they also acted a little bit like a vet. Now, obviously, they would have had a lot of knowledge. They would have been seeing all types of horses with all sorts of injuries day in, day out. And probably from medieval times right up to kind of World War I, farriers quite often treated horses' issues. And this does still happen a little bit to this day. Now, you wouldn't call your farrier out if your horse had cut its leg open or it was colicking or something like that. But if your horse was a little bit unlevel and you were thinking, have they picked up a foot infection, or you're just not 100% sure, you might well call the farrier first because it's slightly cheaper than calling the vet. And if the farrier says, that's nothing to do with the shoeing, no foot infection, then you normally call the vet. But you definitely still ask the farrier's opinion. Blacksmiths and farriers would never be short of work over the centuries. They were a necessity to keeping horses going, which in turn kept people's livelihoods going. Blacksmiths would have endless items to repair, like farming or gardening tools, along with making hinges, handles, nails, cooking utensils, gates, hooks, the list could go on. In times of war, you tended to get more specialised blacksmiths who would make armoury. So an armour smith would be separate to your village blacksmith. Different skills would be needed, though I'm sure your local blacksmith could give a sword a good go. And over the centuries, blacksmiths and farriers have generally been fairly well educated. They sort of needed to be able to run this business. They needed to have good maths skills, be good at measuring. And It was a lucrative business. You know, they could earn a good wage from it. It was hard work. It was long hours, would come with its health issues, especially sort of being bent over working with the metal, could often cause lots of back issues, but it was a good business to be in. Excuse the change of attire. I just had to quickly run outside and it's cold and I don't feel like I'm ready to take my hat off yet. The blacksmith's forge would have been in a very sort of central location in a village, somewhere very accessible, because obviously people had to bring their horses to the forge. Nowadays, the farrier just comes to our own stables and shoes our horses at home. But back then, you would have obviously taken your horse to him. So it needed to be easy to get to. There was probably going to be a pond beside it, one for drinking water for the horses, but also, you know, they're working with hot metals. They needed access to water. And especially if they worked on like cartwheels, even more reason for needing a pond and plenty of water. Stately homes, big country houses may well have had their own blacksmith on site because there'd have been plenty of work for him. I mentioned earlier that farriers were also known to kind of act a little bit like vets, but actually they had some other roles as well. They were also known to be an undertaker, dentist, and horse dealing. The horse dealing the most kind of, you know, expected, because the amount of people they were seeing, you can imagine them helping someone out going, oh, I know a horse for sale, and oh, I know who wants to looking for one, and, you know, probably someone slips them a little bit of money and a deal's done. So it's no surprise that horse dealing was kind of part of one of their side jobs. But the dentistry, the undertaker, that I wasn't expecting. You'd be hard pushed not to find a village that doesn't have a house called the Old Forge. I know all the villages around here have an old forge somewhere, and the likelihood is that was where the original forge used to be, and sometimes there's still a pond right next to it. Now, years ago, surnames were often derived from a person's occupation, and Smith is a fairly common surname, obviously coming from blacksmiths. And because there were so many blacksmiths, there are many surnames Smith. In 1356, farriers of London were called together by the mayor and established the fellowship. However, a farrier's register wasn't created till 1887, when they then set up practical examinations. Further tests were introduced in 1907, and tests became harder after that. In World War I, farriers were vital, and the army actually set up 4 schools to train up more farriers because there was such a demand for them. And interestingly, they taught them obviously how to shoe horses, but they also taught them some veterinary skills, which of course makes total sense. Women blacksmiths aren't a modern thing. Women have been involved in blacksmithing from the 1300s. The Holcomb Bible of the 1300s includes an image of a woman blacksmith making nails. In 1708, a female blacksmith called Mary Hulbert worked on Blenheim Palace. It's hard to know whether she worked because she had a father or a husband in the trade, or whether this was genuinely her career, her business. However, it wasn't till the 1890s census that we see women credited with the occupation of a blacksmith. I'm going to leave the video there because I've got about an hour and a half to edit it and get it up live. I've really enjoyed researching farriers and blacksmiths. Back then, I think the two are very much entwined. Whereas now I feel it's a lot more separate. You get a farrier who shoes horses, you get a blacksmith who works with metal and sort of makes beautiful gates and fencing and things like that. But actually, as a skill, as a trade, as a craft, it's not changed very much. You know, technology hasn't taken it that much further forward. Yes, farriers come out to our stable yards and they can heat up shoes with a little furnace in the back of their van, but they shoe in a very similar way. They're still great for gossip. They still do a bit of horse dealing, actually. I would always, if I was looking for a new horse, I'd always say to the farrier, do you know anything for sale? They still do a bit of veterinary work, really. You know, I'd probably ask my farrier if I had a lame horse, I might get the farrier out before a vet just to see if he thinks it's in the foot or something like that. So there are so many skills in a farrier to this day which really haven't changed since, well, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And I kind of love that. Anyway, like I say, going to leave the video there and I will see you guys again next week. And let's hope I'm a little bit more organised.